Hello, welcome back to Forster Talk. I'm your host Farouk Forster and I'm bringing you a brand new series called Inspiration. Inspiration is where we interview some of the most inspiring athletes and entrepreneurs we can find. So if you would like to hear from someone, comment below in this video. Let's see who you want us to interview and we'll try and interview them. But in this episode, the first one, we were very lucky to interview Amanda Sobhy. Amanda is an American squash player, one of the top players in the world. And just under 2 years ago, at the age of 23, Amanda was on the cusp of breaking into the top 5 in the world. And in a tournament which could have propelled her to the top 5, she ruptured her Achilles. That's a devastating injury for any athlete, never mind a young athlete who is about to reach heights, which is so hard. And so during this interview, we sort of discussed the pressures that Amanda went through as a junior, being one of the top juniors in America and then in the world, and also Amanda's time studying at Harvard and graduating whilst also competing professionally. And of course, we spoke about the injury as well, and the time just before the injury itself, the aftermath of the injury, and how Amanda was able to recover mentally and physically, but most importantly mentally. That was one of the really good things about this interview, is we touched on a lot of the mental aspects of being a top athlete, day in, day out, training day in, day out, and the daily routines, and of course being out for 10 months whilst all other people her age are either out working and partying, or the squash players are training every day and competing, and Amanda getting caught behind. But Amanda is really inspiring. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation with her. She was amazing, and look forward to keeping up to date with her this season as the squash season is starting. So if you're someone who likes sports, if you're someone who likes inspiring stories and hearing about someone who hits rock bottom and then picks himself back up, then this interview is definitely for you. And yeah, enjoy it. Go and we'll put Amanda's social media links below. Go and check them out. Go and let her know that you listened to the interview. Let her know what you think. And most importantly, enjoy the interview. Thank you. Hello, welcome to the first episode of Inspiration, a new series where we interview some of the most inspiring athletes and entrepreneurs on the planet. I'm very happy to have Amanda with me today. Amanda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Very good. So let's jump straight into this. Tell us how you got into squash.
So I come from a squash family, believe it or not, but I actually didn't start until I was 11, so I'm kind of a late bloomer. I played pretty much every single sport before then and started off with tennis at the age of 6. My father is from Egypt and was a squash player there, played on the junior national team, the senior national team, played a little bit professionally, and then came over to the U.S. in the 80s and played tournaments in New York that my mom was the organizer of. So, little squash love there. And then I have an older brother, Omar, who was the first squash player in the family, and so I was always dragged to his tournaments, and naturally when just being around at tournaments, I would just get on court, hit by myself, and really liked it. So one day my dad just decided to put me in a squash tournament. And I didn't really practice much, but I did fairly well, loved it. And so at age 12, I was playing tennis and squash. And then my father said, you know what, choose one of them and become really good at it. And so I chose squash. Haven't looked back since.
Interesting. So you were very successful as a junior. Did you always know that you were going to be a professional, or was it a sort of a thing you realized as you were getting older, sort of 16, 17 years old?
It definitely, I loved the sport and I loved playing it. It definitely wasn't until I was about 16, 17 that I really wanted to play professionally or make it a career out of it. Because I started a little late, I didn't have much success early on at the age of 12 or 13, and so it wasn't until I was 14, 15 that I started to beat players and really take it a bit more seriously, and and start to compete in more tournaments in the country or globally. And so then by 17, when I played the World Junior Open and won it on my birthday, my 17th birthday, ironically, that pretty much solidified that like I wanted to make a career out of it.
So how was that moment when you won the World Junior Open and you were officially the best junior in the world? How did that feel, and did that put pressure on you to say, right, I need to achieve now at a senior professional level?
Yeah, it's a surreal moment, especially because just for the U.S., we're not known for producing squash players, and it's always been players in England or Egypt, France that are doing well and having success and kind of just known for being good squash players. And the U.S., it's like, oh, once in a blue moon do we get a player in maybe the top 20. So I kind of wanted to prove to everybody that, hey, U.S. squash can like be put on the map, even though I do have half Egyptian background. But I'm an American and grew up in the U.S., and so I wanted to kind of be that person to put squash on the map for the U.S. and say that, hey, like, the U.S. can produce players. And then when I did see the tournament dates and saw that it ended on my birthday, the finals were on my birthday.
Which date?
June 29th. So it was June 29th, 2010. I saw that and I was like, I need to win this. So I worked really, really hard, and you know what? And it happened. Like, I won it on my 17th birthday, and by far best birthday gift I've gotten.
Very good. And what was, obviously that was probably your best moment as a junior. I mean,
Yes,
you can't top
100%.
What was your toughest moment as a junior?
Ooh, toughest moment. I think when I started to get successful in the U.S., or once I started to get successful, it was probably after I won the World Juniors, that it was now like, oh, Amanda is really good. Okay, now we expect her to be winning all of these junior tournaments. And because she won it last year, the following year it was actually at Harvard. The World Juniors was at Harvard. And so it was home soil and everything, and so there was a lot of pressure on me, which I don't know if I dealt it the best, but I think I bottled it up a little bit the following World Juniors year and lost 3-love in the semifinals, and that was a bit tough, especially because like all my family and friends came up. It was in the U.S. I was going to Harvard like that following fall, and so yeah, that was a bit difficult to kind of deal with, but learned a lot.
And so you joined Harvard University 8 years ago.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, 2011.
And what did you study?
I studied social anthropology and minored in global health.
Okay, and whilst you were there, you were on the squash team. Tell us, did you lose a game whilst you were playing that?
So I never lost a match throughout my 4 years at Harvard, and I only lost 2 games. So I graduated with a 62-0 record.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And were those the 2 games that you lost? Was that the same match or separate?
No, the 2 games I lost were it was ironically against the same player. It was the first time I ever played her when she came in as a freshman, and I was a sophomore, so I was in my second year. And then the other time I lost a game to her was my last ever collegiate match, which was the finals of the individual nationals.
So whilst you were studying at Harvard, you also were competing as an amateur in professional tournaments. How did you balance, studying at such a prestigious university whilst also competing at the highest level?
Yeah, I mean, I get that a lot from players, and people just ask me now, they're like, how did you do it? To be honest, like, I have no idea how I did it and how I survived, because it's so hard to just balance, like, college squash, academics, try and have a social life, and like I was going and playing professional tournaments on top of it, so I was kind of going away every so often and missing classes, and so a lot of it was, fortunately, I like to say I'm an organized person, so I knew which tournaments I was going to play, I knew which classes I was taking, and so I'd tell my teachers far in advance, and I'd say, hey, this is what I do. I play professionally. I'm taking your class extremely seriously, but I'm going to be away on these dates for a professional tournament, and I'll still hand in assignments on time. Like, I'll make sure I'll do the readings or write the papers. It helps by taking a paper writing class instead of like a problem set class. So I tried to take math classes when I first went to Harvard, and then quickly realized there's no chance I was ever going to like survive having to play on the tour and like go away and still do like math questions and problem sets and everything. That was just, and I was like, nope, we're gonna stick to like writing papers. But I realized that with college, I wasn't going to be able to train the same way that I did in high school, and I wouldn't have enough time, or I wouldn't be able to train at that level. So I had to kind of balance and figure out like, okay, times that I had a lot of work to do and papers due and exams, squash kind of took a little bit of a back seat, and I just had to accept that. So if I had like 40 minutes of free time, like I'd go in there and put the quality that I could in terms of training, but I wasn't going to get like 2 hours every single day. But other times I'd have an easier course load, and so then I can actually properly like put time into training and go play more tournaments. And so it was finding that balance and like accepting that I'd have to prioritize academics, college squash, professional squash at certain times depending on like what the load was.
So how was that for you mentally, knowing that you could be probably excelling a lot faster in professional squash? At the same time, you had a degree. I presume you wanted to study that, and that's what you wanted to do. How did you cope with that mentally, knowing that other professionals are out there putting in long hours and you can't?
It was definitely like a lot of ups and downs. I gotta say, I didn't like get a grip on it until maybe my like last year, and then by then it's like, oh, you're graduating, congrats. I was like, I just kind of like got the hang of it now. But it's always in my family, it's always been education comes first. And a lot of people, once I started being successful in the juniors, they were like, oh, just go on tour right away. Because going to college in the U.S. and playing college squash kind of had the stigma that if you chose college over going professionally, that you weren't taking professionally seriously. And you weren't going to be able to be a good professional. And me being the stubborn human being that I am, I like to show people that, hey, you can do both. Like, you can go get a really great education, play college squash, and then graduate at this young age, still at 22, and go play professionally and still be able to make it. And I did that, and I was one of the first people to do that. And now it's like a major trend that all of these players now are actually thinking, hey, I want to give it a go after college. It's no longer, okay, I'm just going to go to college and then my squash is done. And now players are actually thinking, hey, like, I actually want to give playing professionally a chance after college. Or you have foreign players now thinking, instead of just playing professionally right away, they're now saying, okay, I want to come to college in the U.S. So I think that's huge, and I'm really glad that it happened. And you know, that was kind of like one of my goals of playing college squash and going to the university and then playing professionally afterwards as well. And so I'm pretty happy with how the trend continued.
And this could be quite a controversial question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. I don't want to get you in trouble. But could the powers above in squash, could they do more to sort of help young players if they really want to go and pursue their studies whilst playing squash? Could they do more, or are they doing enough as it is to help these guys and girls?
I think they're doing a lot, and I think that they're doing a much better job of like pushing collegiate players to play professional tournaments and get exposure while they're actually like in college. So if they have the opportunity, then they want them to kind of fully take advantage, instead of just saying, hey, you're at our institute, like all you're focusing on is academics and college squash. Like, we just want you here for the team. You can't go play professional tournaments. We don't really want you leaving. Like, we want you here.
And so we've talked about the serious side of of playing squash whilst at university and the studying, but what about the social side? Were you able to enjoy? I mean, I've heard lots about college life in America. I have no idea what the reality is. The movies say it's great. What was it like for you? In sort of did you try and enjoy social life, or were you just saying head down and focusing like squash and work?
No. No, please. No, I made sure, like, you have to balance, you have to have a social life. I would have been miserable if all I did was focus on like academics and squash. And I probably would have burnt myself out as well. But I grew up, my father was really strict, and I grew up in a kind of strict household. So once I did get that freedom of going to college, I went maybe a little overboard at first, but everything it just comes down to balance and like figuring out what works for you. Granted, once I started to want to take professionally more seriously, and play in more tournaments, then I knew, okay, of course I'm not going to go out like the week before I have a tournament coming up. But my philosophy is kind of like work hard, play hard. So if you get the job done, and then go celebrate. But I wouldn't do that beforehand.
Okay, interesting. So what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 2015.
In 2015. So 2015 and 2016 were two very successful years for you. It sort of catapulted you almost to the top of world squash. So talk us through some of the tournaments over those couple of years where you either came out victorious or you got to the final and just missed out, because there were some big tournaments that you did really well in.
Yeah, so I had, it's funny because I've been playing professional tournaments for maybe since I was 16, but I've never actually been a full-time professional until once I graduated in 2015. So my first...
Define what you mean by full-time professional.
Full-time as in had no studies. I wasn't in school. My day and night job was being a professional squash player, so I had all of this time to kind of really dedicate myself to being the best player in the world.
And just quickly out of interest, for people who may be not familiar with squash, talk us through a full-time professional squash player. What's your average day look like? Average
day would be, you wake up, have breakfast. A lot of us will be working with nutritionists or mindful about eating. Of course, just because we work out a ton does not mean that we can just pollute our bodies with whatever we want. Then we'll go have a training session, usually from 10 to 12, warm up beforehand, cool down afterwards, stretching. Then we'll have maybe 3 hours in between sessions. I usually come back, I make lunch, eat, maybe take a nap, kind of rest, stretch, then go back and have another session 3 to 5, warm up, cool down, and usually afternoon sessions more game based, so play practice matches with players, and then in the afternoon after that you're so exhausted that you basically you eat and then you rest. So it's a lot of just like eat, squash, recover, sleep, nap, play squash again. Sometimes you'll have fitness in the morning. So yeah, and then sleep is kind of just as vital, part of training for all of us. So then we go to bed quite early or try and get 8 hours of sleep. And yeah, and I usually do that about 5 days a week. And then Saturday mornings, I just have one morning session. It's usually fitness, and then take Saturday afternoon and Sunday off.
So does it get boring sometimes? If you got
it does get a bit monotonous, and it definitely sets yourself up for burnout, which you have to kind of avoid, especially when the season goes from kind of September 1st until June 1st. It's long, and if you're doing that all the time and playing tournaments on top of it, you get exhausted. Just mentally, you just burn out. There's sometimes times where you're like, I don't want to do this. So I always like to just mix it up a little bit, and try and do training that keeps me excited. So when I wake up and it's more of yay, I'm excited to train and better myself and improve instead of like, oh my God, I'm dreading this session. And that when that happens, then you know that something needs to change a little bit, whether like your training structure or just you might need a couple days off. I mean, that's I say that I'll train twice a day, 5 days a week, but you know, sometimes things change depending on how my body feels or mentally how I'm feeling.
Okay, so back to 2015, 2016. How old are you then?
I was 22.
So you're 22. In 2015, you graduated Harvard. Talk us through some of the tournaments in the Pan American Games, the historic record that you broke. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so as soon as I graduated that summer, we had to play the Pan American Games in Toronto. And
for those who might be not familiar with the Pan American Games, which you should be, but if you're not, can you explain?
The Pan American Games is basically the kind of the Commonwealth Games for those in North America, South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And so it's a bunch of games. It's like a mini Olympics, but only for that kind of Western Hemisphere. And you know, because squash is not an Olympic sport, we take that very seriously. And it's one of those times that you get to represent your country, and so it's a big deal for us. Yeah. So that was my first Pan American Games that I played, and it was just an unbelievable experience, and I ended up winning 3 gold medals in the individual, the doubles, and the team event, which I was the first player to ever win 3 gold medals in a single Pan American event. So that was awesome. Yeah. Loved it,
that
you know.
Felt amazing.
It definitely was. And there's a picture of me holding the gold medals, and I like have the biggest like smile on my face.
Maybe we could edit that picture in here.
But you know, that was kind of my first start into being a full-time professional, and it was a great experience, and really loved it. And we actually have the next Pan American Games happening in the summer of 2019 in Lima, Peru. So I'll be looking forward to trying to get a repeat 3 gold medals there.
Fantastic. To be the first female to win 3 gold medals twice.
Yeah.
The first squash player.
I think first squash player, yes.
Not the first athlete.
No, I think first squash player.
Just for squash.
Yeah, I don't really know for all the athletes there.
And then tell us a bit more about some of the tournaments the rest of that year, the Tournaments of Champions and the World Series final in Dubai.
Yeah.
2015 and 2016.
Yes.
Tell us about your
So it was my first full season on tour was definitely a big learning experience because I had all of this time to just be a professional and not actually have to worry about studying or writing papers or anything. I thought that I needed to kind of fill up this time like training or overscheduling myself and weekends away and exhibitions, invitationals, tournaments. So I managed myself pretty poorly in the beginning, and actually my first season got a little bit burnt out. Also, I think there was a lot of pressure on me because I was now free of school to just rise up in the rankings and all of a sudden beat all of these players, which it's really hard to do. I mean, the top players are at the top for a reason, and I was hovering around 10 in the world, and to try and make that breakthrough, I felt that I was very close, but I was not there yet. And each tournament that I played, I felt I was getting closer and closer. It wasn't until the Tournament of Champions I played in January of 2016 that I had my big break. And I beat the number 2 seed and got to the finals as the 10 seed. And ended up losing in the finals, but it was kind of like, okay, I'm here, I can be a contender with like the top dogs.
So that was sort of the first time you realized, okay, now I truly believe that.
Yes.
This is the stage that I can perform in.
Yes, and it was I can be one of the top players in the world, and I can beat the top players in the world. And there's no, honestly, like if I ever had to choose a tournament to kind of have a big break in, it's the Tournament of Champions, because it's held in Grand Central Station. I was born in New York, and so that's kind of like a home tournament for me, and everyone can come watch, and so I actually thrive. I love that kind of atmosphere, and it's really rowdy and obnoxious as it would be in New York. And you know, everyone's cheering loudly and they're all cheering for me, so I love it.
Best kind of atmosphere. The
Yeah.
best kind of atmosphere is when, just sort of a side tangent, the question I wanted to ask you, which venue has the best atmosphere in the world?
Tournament of Champions, 100%. But if I had to choose an atmosphere that I absolutely love, it was the college squash atmosphere. I wish tournaments were always like that, because it's just rowdy. You have people they don't even know what squash is, but because they just are like so kind of tied to the school, they want their school to win. And there's rivals, and just tons of people come watch. A lot of people tailgate beforehand, and so they get really, really into it, and it's just such an awesome atmosphere.
Can you explain tailgating for our British audience?
Yes. Sorry,
I was
tailgating.
civilized British audience.
So for a lot of sporting events, especially college sporting events, people will wake up in the morning and just start drinking. And they'll usually show up to games very heavily intoxicated, and that creates quite the rowdy atmosphere.
I feel like Brits do that anyway, but we don't.
You don't call it tailgating. Yeah, it's just a normal.
At 9 in the morning in the Wetherspoons.
Yeah. So that catapulted me into the top 8 in the world, and by then I was now getting to quarterfinals, and I didn't reach another final that season, but I was consistently making quarterfinals and semis, and I qualified for the World Series finals in Dubai, which I was the first American ever to do so. So it was a lot of firsts, and it was a really good learning experience for me, and I felt like I learned a lot that first year on tour that I could carry into my next season, and to be an even better professional and do things a bit more professionally.
So what were the changes you made going from first season to second season?
I learned to structure my training program a little bit more intelligently, especially working with my coach. He helped me. My coach is Thierry Lincou, who was a former world #1 from France and played on the professional tour, so he's a big mentor. And that summer, between the 2016 summer, I put in a good 7-week training block in, which I've never done before. And so I actually had a lot of time to focus on improving my fitness, my movement around the court, kind of make any sort of body composition changes, really focus on working on my game, because now I had a lot of time, whereas in the season, you don't really get much time bouncing from tournament to tournament. It's more of just like staying injury-free, mentally just like healthy, and just staying sharp. So I went into that season like really excited, just to kind of show everybody what I've been working on that summer. And my first tournament, I got to the finals of the Hong Kong Open. I unfortunately lost in the finals, but that was kind of just like really encouraging to go into the first tournament of the new season and making it to the finals. I beat the world #1, I beat another top player in the world, and so that was a huge confidence booster for me. And then my next tournament, I got to the finals as well. Ended up losing in the finals again. It was the NetSuite Open in San Francisco, but I beat players that I've never beaten before. So that was also really encouraging, and so I was doing well, and I was feeling really, really kind of just confident and excited, and I thought, okay, this is gonna be, I can get myself into like the top 5 hopefully this season. So I was around 6 in the world. This is late fall, and then this is kind of when everything just went south and the injuries started to happen. But I played in the Women's World Team Championships in end of November, and that was kind of our last event of the fall. And I played really well and won all of my matches except for one of them, and performed, backed it up day after day after day. But by the end of the week there, I found out that I partially tore my plantar fascia. Yeah.
Okay, so explain to us what, people like myself who are not familiar with that injury, what is that injury and what was the impact of that injury at the time? Yeah,
so for squash players, plantar fasciitis is a huge kind of common squash injury because of it's the plantar fascia, which is the tendon on the bottom of the foot, and it just gets like really, really inflamed. For me, I had a partial tear, a very low partial tear, but it was partially torn. And it's just from constant impact on the court, because if you think about it, you're playing matches and it's just constant pounding on a hardwood floor, which obviously is not the best for you. And if you're playing on older courts or at older clubs, the floors are not sprung as properly, so you'll feel it more on your joints instead of kind of having that little bit of cushion for you. And so that whole week we were playing at these old clubs, and I was having heavy match after heavy match, like day after day for 5 days straight on at these old courts, hard floors. And so by the end of the week, I woke up and could not walk on my foot. I was walking on the side of my foot and just like kind of dragging my leg and limping heavily in the morning. And I remember like saying to my teammate, I was like, oh my God, how am I supposed to play today? And I ended up having to play, and I had to play Nicole David, which is announced as the like best female squash player ever. She was world number 1 for 9 years, and she wasn't world number 1 then, but she was still like at the top of her game and in the top 5. And so she was a very good player, and I had a very tough match happening. And so I don't know how, but I ended up winning 11-9 in the 5th and helped the U.S. team get to our best finish of 5th place, which was huge. And I was just so thankful that week was over, because now I was like, okay, I can rest my foot and, hopefully it will go away and it will be fine. So I rested it, and when I came back to training, the problem came right back. And I was like, okay, this is more serious than I thought, because now it's starting to affect my training and I was starting to get worried. So I got it diagnosed, and I found out that I had a 30% partial tear in my plantar fascia, which wasn't that bad, but it was one of those little kind of lingering injuries that you need to actually address as a serious injury, because you couldn't just continue to play on it. It will still be there. So the doctor was like, oh, it's fine. Like, you just need to rest and be off your foot and ice it. And I was like, I can't be off of my foot. I have a tournament coming up in 2 weeks, and that was the Tournament of Champions in Grand Central, which I got to the finals the year before. And so I was like, I can't just like rest and sit and not do anything. I was like, I have to prepare for this tournament. So that was just, those 2 weeks were just really difficult for me, in the sense that I didn't know what to do. Some days were better than others, and I'd wake up and some days I could play squash a little bit, other days I just could not push off. And so I was doing a little bit of more non-impact stuff, and I was talking to my coach a ton every day. I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, do I pull out of this tournament? Do I just go in there and play and hope for the best? Or do I go and play and retire if I need to? Which, like, that was the last thing I wanted. So I was really, really just, like, frustrated and just mentally all over the place. I ended up playing the tournament and losing in the second round, which was worse than I was expected to do. And that was a bit tough, but it was kind of just a wake-up call, in the sense that, okay, I need to address this issue. So I took the next 3.5 weeks off pretty much from squash and just rehabbed it in New York City, which was a lot of just like, I don't know what the machine was called, but it was stim.
Sorry?
It was like electric stim for the rehab. Right. To try and heal it. And like breaking up the scar tissue in the plantar fascia. And so I was going down to New York every few days from Boston, which is like a 4-hour train ride, back and forth. Every few days I'd go from Boston, spend a few days in Boston, go down to New York for a few days, get treatment there. Like, it was so exhausting. I was just really tired. I wasn't really doing much training. I was doing a lot of like bike, and I was getting frustrated at just how this wasn't really healing as fast as it should be. And so it started to get better after like a month mark, and I ended up playing in the next tournament, which was mid-February, and that was the Windy City Open in Chicago. And I wasn't going in there confidently. I was kind of like, okay, let's see how this is. Like, we're going to be really kind of cautious about my foot. And fortunately, I had a good draw in the sense that I could make my seeding without having to play any like super duper tough matches. And I got to the quarterfinals, ended up losing. I was just kind of happy that I made my seeding. And so then I had to play the next tournament. My next tournament was in Colombia.
So just to summarize, before we get to this next point, you've been at this point, this is your second season as a professional,
yes,
full-time professional. You played professional tournaments in the years before this. You graduated from Harvard University. You're now coming into previous to your foot injury, you had a really good wave and you were pushing for the top 5 in the world.
Yeah.
You had your foot injury in January 2017. You then were taking treatment for that, and that started to improve slowly.
Yes.
So coming into this tournament in Colombia, you were world number 6.
Yes, highest world ranking to date. This tournament in Colombia is a new tournament, and I was seeded number 1, and should I have won it, would have been my highest tournament win to date, and probably would have gotten me very, very, very close to top 5, if not pushing me into the top 5 of the world.
And just tell us, if you are top 5 in the world, what does that mean as a squash player, as a high-performing athlete, to be one of the top 5 best in the world? What does that mean to you?
It's huge. I mean, I've dreamt of it my whole life, and even though 6 and 5 is right next to each other, saying that you're top 5 in the world versus top 10 in the world is a huge difference, and like, it just makes it much more surreal that it's like you're that much closer to being world number 1. And so at the top of the level, those tiny little like teeny tiny gains that you can make and improvements is huge. And so I really wanted to get to top 5, would have been like huge for me. And so I went into Colombia, wasn't feeling the most confident, but my foot was getting better and better. And surprisingly, that week, I started to feel my squash was starting to come back, and I was starting to feel a bit better in my squash. And I was playing my matches. I won them 3-love. I was feeling better, moving better on court. So I was excited. I was like, yeah, I actually feel really good for this tournament. Like, I think I can win this. And so I was playing in the semifinals against my U.S. teammate, Olivia, who's the U.S. number 2. And I was 2-love, 10-5, match ball up, like cruising, playing really well. And I ruptured my left Achilles. And I
can't believe you're laughing at it.
Because who thinks of this? Honestly, like, how does this happen? When you rupture an Achilles, it's a very common injury for squash, but when you think of it, it's mainly like middle-aged club member men who are like unfit and just old. And I was not that. That's not what I embodied. And so I just could not believe it. And of all places to rupture your Achilles, do it on top of a mountain in Colombia on match ball. So I mean, it's still...
For those of you who are not aware, match ball means if Amanda would have won the next point, she would have won that match and been through to the final
Yes.
of this tournament, of which, if Amanda would have won this tournament, would have given her a seriously good chance of being in the top 5 very soon afterwards. But then, yes.
So when it happened, and rupturing your Achilles, it feels like someone pretty much kicks you in the back of the leg or hits you with the racket. And so I fell flat on my face. I pushed off to get to a ball in the front, and I just fell flat down. And I thought that Olivia hit me. And so I was on the ground, and I turned back, and I was like, did you hit me? And she's like, no, I didn't touch you. And I knew right away I ruptured my Achilles. Right away. And I was like, oh my God, I just popped my Achilles. And the panic and shock that just filled my body is honestly, like, it still kind of gives me, like, shivers. And I don't ever wish it upon anybody.
It's crazy in that moment, like that, because I've seen the video. If you have a look at the video, it really looks like a really simple movement. Just a simple movement forward. And it's crazy in that moment, you knew that this is what I've done. The seriousness of your injury was realized straight away.
Yeah, and I was in shock. I was like, oh my goodness, I just ruptured my Achilles in Colombia, in this foreign country that I've never been to, and I've just done this serious injury to myself. And I know that, like, the minimum timeout is 9 months. And I am just hysterically crying on court, unable to move. Like, I don't want to touch my foot at all. We have Colombian medics who don't speak English coming on court, like, trying to, like, move my foot, and I'm just like, don't even touch it. Olivia's crying hysterically. They had to carry me off court in a stretcher, and I got a relatively large painkiller shot in my bum. But which helped, because some people say that the pain of rupturing your Achilles is absolutely brutal. Fortunately, I didn't feel a lot of pain. It was more of just the shock of it all.
Was that because you were so shocked that actually masked a lot of the pain that you could have felt?
I think so, and also they just gave me a painkiller right away. But so because they set up this glass court on top of this mountain overlooking the city, beautiful.
Which city?
It was Florida Blanca. Yeah. And so the only way to get up this mountain is taking an 8-minute cable car ride up, which obviously I'm not going to be able to go down in a stretcher, or drive like 20 minutes up this windy mountain dirt road. And that whole week, it was pouring rain, and which it wasn't pouring. They were in a massive drought the few months beforehand. So of course I ran, like, out of all times, it was just pouring that week we were there. And so it created huge potholes and just holes in the dirt and everything. And so I had to go down this ambulance, like, in the stretcher, drive down, like, death gripping the stretcher, just like in fear. And it took an hour to get down this mountain. And I was literally just in so much shock. It was awful. And I was just panicked, like, just completely strapped in, like, with these Colombian medics that, like, I don't know. I was with the COO of PSA, which is the Professional Squash Association. So he came with me, and I was just like, are we there yet? And he's like, we're not even close.
So you were fully aware, whilst you were in the ambulance and going down this treacherous road, of what was going on?
Oh, 100%. 100. And I just laid down there, couldn't move for an hour, just thinking, like, I just ruptured my Achilles. Like, I just ruptured my Achilles. Like, oh my goodness, what is this going to look like me for the next, like, 9 months? Because I'm still thinking I can come back in 9 months. Joke's on me. But fortunately, Florida Blanca is a wealthier area in Colombia, and so the hospital was quite nice. But I was talking to my parents on the phone. Like, my parents were all watching me on Squash TV, watching my match, so they saw when it happened. And my mom actually ruptured her Achilles before, and so she knew right away. And so my mom pretty much is like a woman on a mission, just emailing to figure out, okay, we need a doctor to perform the surgery when she gets back. And I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, what does this look like for me? I'm getting messages from a ton of people. I need to figure out insurance because I'm in a foreign country. Like, I'm in a hospital. Am I going to get charged an astronomical amount? It's also, the Colombian, like, people in the hospital are trying to put an IV into my hand, and I was like, what are you doing? And so the thing when you do rupture your Achilles, honestly, I mean, once you get a painkiller to kind of mask the pain, there's really nothing you can do before like getting surgery. It's just kind of just dead. It just hangs there. And you're supposed to be getting surgery within the week that you rupture it, or else your body starts to like repair it itself, and you'd rather have surgery done to it. So I basically was just sitting in the hospital, and they're like, oh, do you want surgery here? And I was like, no. I was like, can you just release me so I can just go back to the hotel and sleep a little bit, maybe? But yeah, so that was kind of, I spent the next day in Colombia, and just was on crutches and in a cast, and then my flight was out to New York the next day. Fortunately, because Liv ended up making it to the final, she changed her flight to be on the same flight with me back to New York. So she helped me out a lot. I was just being carried through the airport in a wheelchair and making sure that I kept my foot elevated on the flight. And so so by the end of the week, we were like, how did we survive this? Like, this is ridiculous. It's still just kind of like, you just laugh about it, because it's like, how did this happen to me? But I got to New York, and my parents were waiting for me, and saw they had a surgeon lined up, and so I saw him the following day, which fortunately he's performed a lot of Achilles repair surgery on squash players. And so I got surgery end of that week. And from there, that's kind of when the whole recovery process started. Yeah, and that's a whole nother story in itself.
So how long was the recovery?
It took a total of 10 months before I was able to come back fully on the professional squash tour again.
So you were 23 years old.
I was 23 years old.
23 years old, nearly at the top in the world, top 5, ruptured the Achilles, and now you have 10 months off. But at the time, did you know that it would have been 10 months, or for you, could it have been longer, or not at all?
No, so I knew that an Achilles rupture is really difficult to kind of come back from in terms of the rehab process. And what I had in my head was nowhere near how difficult it actually was. So I thought that, okay, it's going to take about 6 months until I could properly start training again. And then I'd have 3 months to properly train to get ready to be back competing in 9 months at like a relatively solid standard. I was so off. It took me 10 months and to get back. And by that point, I didn't feel as if I was 100%, just in terms of strength-wise and push-off and movement-wise and speed. But it was at that point where I was like, I can't keep waiting around. I have to just get back on the horse. There'll never be a point in time where I'm like, I'm ready. It was like, okay, you just have to go out there and do it. And so I got ruptured at March 10th of 2017 and got surgery March 17th. And so when I had surgery, I accepted it, which kind of was a major thing, because when you have huge kind of career-threatening injuries like that, it's so easy for people to just go into this like deep, dark depression and like black hole and say, oh my God, my career's over, like this is the end, what am I gonna do, like, and just mope around and sulk and everything. And I told myself, I was like, this is not gonna be beneficial if I just like mope around and I'm just sulking the whole entire time, and I need to just feel sorry for myself. I was like, okay, I'm going to be out for a long time, might as well make the best of the situation. I was like, I've never had this much time off, and so I'll just be a real person. Like, this is the first time that I cannot like work out. I can't play squash. I can barely work out except for like upper body stuff. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to enjoy this time off. And so I hate to say it, but I spent about 4 months of just straight like partying. And I just went out with my friends. I went to concerts. I went out to dinner. I just I took vacations. And you know what? If people were like, oh, come to New York, like we have this event happening, I was like, I'm there. Come down. Yeah.
So what stage of the recovery was this? Sort of
This was, I would say, from probably, so I was in a cast and crutches for about 5.5 weeks. And I was non-weight bearing. At that point, I couldn't really do much. And it was really difficult because it was just annoying because I had to rely on someone else to do things for me. So I had my mom to help me shower, make me food, kind of carry my stuff from my bedroom to the living room. And she'd work during the day, so I'd kind of be like confined to the living room or either my bedroom, just like either reading or or just kind of Netflix a little bit, watching TV and watching squash TV, and so I had to keep myself occupied, and it was really hard to just it was a hassle to go and cook food and everything. So I actually had a meal service delivery to kind of bring me food for the week. And so that was annoying. Once I was able to walk in a walking boot and get off crutches, it was a lot better because I was able to function, but I was just in a walking boot. And I actually learned to pretty much walk pretty easily in the walking boot, but I was still handicapped. So when I went to concerts and music festivals and sporting events, I would mooch so much of just being handicapped. I'd basically just go up to every single handicapped section or parking or just try and upgrade things, and I was like, I'm crippled. I was like, I need help. I was like, I also need 3 of my friends to help me. So I had a blast. It was so much fun, and that was probably from, I'd say, mid-April or end of April to all throughout end of the summer.
Okay. So during that period, you're having a blast.
Mm-hmm.
You're parking in disabled spots in the car parks. You're going into disabled section in concerts, and it's a great time. Was there a part of you that was thinking, God, I'm losing ground here on these guys? I was so close to them, but now, they're going to be playing more tournaments and winning more matches.
I never had that thought in my head. It actually, surprisingly, I did not miss playing squash. I was so happy not playing squash. It wasn't until about the 5.5 month mark, so I'd say mid-July, where I was just so kind of done with partying and all of that, I wanted to work out again and start to train a little bit, and I couldn't. I just learned to walk beginning of July without a walking boot. I mean, it took me 3 weeks to properly learn to walk without the walking boot, because I'd walk and then my foot would get really sore, so then I'd be back in the walking boot and then do that for a few days, and then I'd walk again in shoes, and then it'd get really sore, and so I'd be back in the walking boot. So it took me a full all of June pretty much to properly get walking in 2 shoes. And so by then, it's okay, no one sees that I'm actually crippled, but I still feel very handicapped and limited. And all I could do was just ride the bike on very low resistance. So at that point, I didn't want to get back on the squash court, but it was more of just I wanted to do something, some sort of physical exercise, or just, it was starting to get mentally I wasn't that happy just going out all the time, because now I was waking up and I was I have no purpose to my day. I was I used to wake up and be let's go train. Now I wake up and I was I have an hour of PT to do, and what do I do? What do I do? And I was I don't want to keep partying.
So was it this partying, was this in Boston?
Boston, New York. I went to Barbados. Yes.
You did a world tour? You partying,
yeah,
partying.
Exactly. Yeah. And so honestly, I was so bored out of my mind that I watched the entire Game of Thrones from start to wherever the new season that came out last year. and I finished that in 2 weeks. So I was averaging about like 4 episodes a day.
Are they hour-long episodes?
Yes. That's how bored I was. I literally had nothing to do. And so that kind of just sucked because it was like, I have no, like, my day is just so mundane and like I have no purpose and like I don't know what to do. And at that point it was kind of, so that's when it started to get like, mentally it started to get tough, especially in like, it was kind of up and down. So August was okay. I was with my family. We took a family vacation to Egypt, which was really nice. So I was able to be busy. I started to be able to do lunging, and so my foot was getting a little bit better. It was getting a tiny bit stronger, and so I was like, okay, once I get back from my vacation in Egypt, I'll get on court, and I'm going to start hitting squash balls by myself. And so by that point, that was, so let's see, March, April, May, June, July, August. That was 5.5 months. And so that was when I started to get back on court 5.5 months later. And I think having that time off was good for me mentally because I was like, okay, I'm excited to get back playing squash. And like I can kind of properly like stand there and hit the ball again. And I feel refreshed. Like I have a clean slate, I can start over. And I can, because clearly in my training something didn't work because I got injured. So I was like, okay, I need to maybe do things differently. But at this point, so in terms of the recovery process for Achilles rupture, it's okay, 5.5 weeks you're in on crutches, and then 6 weeks you're in a walking boot, and then you spend a few weeks kind of walking shoes, and your PT, we did a ton of just like riding the bike on low resistance, working bands and flexion, breaking up the scar tissue. So I was hitting all these check marks. Wasn't until I started end of August when I needed to start doing squash specific build-up movements. So lunging, more of like kind of running again. And it was maybe like pushing off and having to jump, which I wasn't doing any of that. So end of August when I got back on court and I was hitting the ball by myself, I thought, okay, and in my mind, I still had it set. I wanted to come back in 9 months for the World Championships that was going to be held in Manchester in December of 2017.
Just this recent?
Yes, this past December. So I had that programmed in my mind, and I told the Professional World Tour, I was like, told everyone, I'm going to come back 9 months. I was like, I'm athletic, I'm young, I'm going to heal. I've heard all these people tell me stories. They're like, oh yeah, by the 7th month mark, I was playing a deep game, and I was moving on court, and I was like, okay, I can do this. And so by September, I was back on court a little bit, but like I could barely move. I wasn't moving properly. I was kind of just like dragging my leg a bit. So I was on court and I was able to hit balls, but I wasn't doing justice to myself. And my PT, my rehab in Boston, they weren't treating me as a professional squash player. They were kind of just treating me as any average Joe Schmo that ruptures their Achilles. So I was getting frustrated because my progress kind of stalled a little bit. And at this point, I was just like, I gained a lot of weight from like just going at it for 5 months and not doing anything and eating and drinking whatever I wanted. I wanted to just work out. I wanted to get back into squash. I really missed it at this point. The new season started, and so that was tough because players were playing in tournaments and I couldn't. And so that was, and here, even though it was at the like 6 month mark, 6 months, I thought, this is me, I thought I'd be able to play squash properly at 6 months. And I still like was limping a little bit. I was dragging my leg. It was just, the progress wasn't there. The strength wasn't there. I was still so weak. And the rehab up in Boston, they were measuring my progress on whether I could do a single leg calf raise. on my left foot, which like even to this day, I can't do it properly. And that was just so frustrating because I just couldn't do that for the life of me. And no matter how many calf raises I was doing with like help, I just could not do a single leg calf raise. Yeah, so we're about the 5-month mark, and this is kind of when I started, the 5.5-month mark, where I started to get back into playing squash. And at this point, I was ready to get back into playing squash, but my body was not ready. And so that was the mentally like toughest part. The 6.5 month mark was probably mentally the toughest for me, because my rehab in Boston was stalled a little bit. My progress wasn't moving as fast as I could. I was able to get on court, but I just wasn't doing justice. And I was dragging my leg a bit, and I couldn't really push off, and so I wasn't doing it properly. And I knew that, and I thought that it'd come back quickly, and it wasn't. And so I was just getting really, really just frustrated by it all. And at this point, it was the 6-month mark, and the season just started, and so players were playing in tournaments that I wanted to be in, but obviously I'm not even close to being there. And I kind of just realized like I'm still so weak, and like I still had it in my head that I wanted to come back in 9 months, because I told everyone I was going to come back in 9 months for the World Championships.
You told your fellow professionals.
Yep.
Your family,
I was like,
your
I'll
friends.
see you, because I thought that you'd be able to come back in 9 months. This is me thinking that, oh yeah, just 9 months and you'll be fine playing at a professional level again. So I thought that if I didn't hit 9 months, I was going to be a failure, and that if I needed more time, then there was something wrong. And so I started to have like a lot of anxiety about this, and like just this clock kind of winding down, I started to get monthly panic attacks, which was new to me, and I just like would be crying all the time, because I was just so kind of distraught over it, and I wanted to be back playing squash, and I felt so hopeless because I didn't know what to do, and clearly my rehab place in Boston was not treating me as a full-time professional, and I needed to be somewhere else. So beginning of October, I went down to Philadelphia for the US Open, where I was commentating a little bit. And that was probably the lowest of the low for me. And
that was in October.
That was in October. And so it was great. I got to see a bunch of my friends on tour that I haven't seen in so long. But it was also really tough because it was the US Open, and here I am watching my peers compete and I can't. And I gained a lot of weight from being injured and being out. I was so just like, my progress was stagnant, and I didn't know, I was really hopeless, and just I didn't know what to do in terms of training. And my rehab in Boston kind of released me really early, and they said, okay, go do all your exercises with your fitness coach. And my fitness coach is, well, what's your PT saying? And so I was like, I can't be this middle person. I need someone who's going to take charge and knows what they're doing and is going to do this rehab program for me, but also do the fitness on top of it to get me back to being a professional squash player. And so when I was in Philly, I saw this this rehab person named Joe Zarrett, who works a lot with the squash players and is well known in the squash community and has rehabbed a ton of squash players before. And so he's in Philadelphia, and so I was like, oh, Joe, I'm down here. Do you mind taking a look at my Achilles? And so he looked at it, put me through a workout, and I was so bad. I was shockingly bad. Like, I could not do basic just like movements or double calf raise, and they just looked at me and they're like, what have you been doing up there? And I literally just broke down, just hysterically crying, because I was like, I'm so weak, I don't know what to do. I was like, I need this. I basically need to come down here for an extended period of time, because it's not cutting it up in Boston anymore. And he said to me, he was like, you need to come here for like 5 weeks. And I told him, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I need to do. And so we
So at that point, when you realized, was it the realization that made you so hysterical? Was it the realization that what you've been doing this whole time potentially was nowhere near what you could have been doing in terms of your recovery?
Yeah.
What was?
I think it was a mixture of both. It was definitely probably the second, where I could have been doing so much more in terms of my recovery. But because I've never experienced this before, I thought that, okay, it was just like, and I was hitting the check marks, that it was fine. But I could have done a ton of other stuff in terms of just like working on improving other parts of my body. So maybe like improving the glute strength, or like hamstrings, or like my other leg, or core strength. That just because I was out with my left Achilles does not mean that like my entire body could not do. I couldn't do other stuff. And because Joe and his team has worked with a ton of like professional athletes before, they knew what they were doing. And their facility is a rehab place plus fitness as well. And that's what I was missing. I was missing that kind of having everything under one roof and having someone supervise it. And so I broke down in the sense that I'm still so weak. I'm really hopeless, and like, this is what I needed. This is what I've been missing out on, and it was kind of just like, I need someone like this. So I told him, I was like, I'm gonna figure it out. I was like, I need to come here for 5 weeks. Like, I'm gonna do it. And he said, okay. He was like, I'm gonna be committed, but like, I want you to be committed. And I told him, I was like, I'm 100% in. So I told U.S. Squash, which is the squash governing body in the U.S., I told them, I was like, listen, I need to come down to Philly for an extended period of time. I need you to help me find somewhere to live and to figure out a deal to set up with Joe. And so within 2 days, got that all sorted, found me somewhere to live in Philly. And I went back up to Boston, packed my bags, moved down there, and trained there for 5 days a week for 5 weeks. And trained from middle of November all the way through middle of October all the way through end of November, right before Thanksgiving. And he single-handedly, like, he brought me back to life.
Interesting. Before you moved to Philadelphia, and that time when you realized maybe how far behind you were in your recovery, at that point did you think, I can't do this anymore? Did you think, or before that, did you have thoughts of, this, I just can't come back, or if I do come back, I'll never be the same? Question, can I actually be a professional squash player?
There, 100%. I mean, even during that time in Philadelphia, I still had those thoughts. And it was just, am I ever going to get back to playing at the level I was before I got injured? Or am I ever going to get back playing professionally? It was because it just seemed so far away at that point when I realized like how weak I was. It just, to get back playing and moving, and squash is physically a demanding sport. So just to think that far ahead was kind of a bit like dejecting, because it's like, oh my God, I have so much work to do and so far to go, and I do not see any sort of light at the end of this tunnel. And even in Philly, my sports psychologist is in Philly, and so I was working with her a lot. And we had to kind of come to terms and accept that I am not going to be ready in 9 months. And that's okay. At the end of the day, I've been out for 9 months. What's the problem going to be being out another month? Might as well take my time, do things properly, and really get back to performing at a level that's acceptable for playing on the professional tour, than trying to rush it and potentially being really disappointed in my performance, risking injury again, or compensating and injuring something else, which I didn't want. So once I kind of was able to like clear that and just not have any sort of deadline on when I was going to come back on tour, it was just like a big weight lifted off my shoulders, and I could kind of just like focus on improving and training. And then things started to, within like my first week at Zaret, I was significantly stronger and better, and I started running. And when I was in Philly, I started working with a nutritionist, and she helped me a ton as well. And so I really, really liked, and it was kind of just, it was almost like I had to go to rehab for like a drug addiction or something and be really isolated. That was my only priority, was trying to get healthy. And I'd commute into the city. I'd go to Zaret's and rehab and fitness. I'd go do other exercise. So I was doing yoga. I was hitting by myself, working with my sports psychologist, seeing the nutritionist, and it was really. And then I'd commute back at the end of the day to where I was living out in the suburbs, and it was. I loved it. And I was a lot happier, and it was great. And those 5 weeks like helped me out, pretty much brought me back to like playing at a solid level.
Just out of interest, bits of a side tangent, yoga. I tried yoga myself once. It was very, very hard. I don't know, people who haven't done yoga before actually underestimate how hard it is.
It is.
How much
so
does it help
difficult.
you with like being a professional athlete? Is yoga make a big difference for you with your flexibility and your strength, and maybe even your mental strength as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's so easy to kind of push yoga aside because it's like, oh, no one really thinks of the recovery, and if it doesn't get your heart rate up, then it's not that important. And so it gets overlooked, but oh my God, the like strength, and just, you go in there, you're like, yeah, I'm a professional athlete. Like this is fine, I can totally do it. And like you're holding poses and you're literally just shaking, and it's like your core, and you have to engage like all of these muscles and just holding these poses, and it's really difficult. And then also it's just like mentally, it's kind of just like you have to stick with it, and also it's just like really calming and everything. So it's quite nice. So I've tried to incorporate it into my training, and especially now having to pay so much attention on the recovery aspect of my training now. Yoga helps a ton.
Interesting. So yoga being one thing for recovering, and probably a general thing you would advise to
Yes.
people in general.
Just
Maybe
yeah.
long-limbed people like myself can do the
Overall,
bit of yoga
for
too.
flexibility, yeah.
What other advice do you have for athletes, or not even athletes, if your average Joe who, as you said, maybe he's a bit older and he's ruptured his Achilles like you did? What advice do you have for those people?
Yeah.
Psychologically as well as physically.
I would say the main thing is take it day by day and kind of trust the process. It's such a cliche term, and I got
They
so
like that in
angry.
Philadelphia, don't they?
Oh yeah,
Trust the process.
But it's and I got so angry when people kept saying you just have to trust the process, and I'd be like, what process is this? Like, I don't get it. It was like, what am I supposed to trust? I was like, I don't trust anything. I was like, it's not working. And they're like, wow, like just enjoy the journey. Like take it day by day. Focus on like the little goals that you can accomplish in the day, instead of thinking like, okay, I need to be running in like X amount of months, or I need to be back on tour playing a professional tournament in 7 months. That's just not going to help you. That's going to do your head in if you just think of how far you have to go. But if you can think of, okay, today I was able to improve in a resistance band in terms of my flexibility, or my range of motion improved a couple degrees. That's huge. And those little attainable goals that you can achieve like weekly, daily, that's kind of what kept me like really positive throughout the experience. So that's what I would advise. And kind of enjoy the journey, embrace the journey, instead of just thinking of the end result.
So you were really thinking of knowing that this experience, in a weird way, is benefiting you in the sense of make you appreciate what you're doing more, and realizing that the journey that you're going on is the most important thing, rather than
100%. Yeah. After injuring my Achilles, I have a newfound appreciation for my body and what it can do. And I'm not taking it for granted as much. But yeah, so it definitely, and because when I started back training again, I did have essentially a clean slate. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to come back on tour again, I'm going to do things properly. So I honed in on my nutrition. I focused on recovery. I tried to structure my training schedule a bit more intelligently. It was more of like being a bit more mindful about my body and like how does it feel, and kind of like mindful about my eating and like what foods make me perform the best or feel the best, in terms of also like training wise, what makes my body feel really good, and then making sure that on the fitness aspect of my training, it was trying to be a bit more non-impact related, so a lot on the bike or the elliptical, instead of just like running all the time, because now like my joints feel it a bit more. So it was all a combination of that.
Okay. So, it was
my first tournament back?
Yes.
It ended up being 10 months. It was the Tournament of Champions again.
Tournament of Champions.
Yeah,
okay.
Which I was so happy to have that be my first tournament back, because that was in my hometown. And, you know, all my friends and family came and they were so excited just to see me get back out there. And I figured, I was like, okay, I've been out for so long, I'm going to just kind of like make a big kind of comeback slogan and have fun with it, because there's no expectation. My goal was just to like win my first match and see how I was, and just have fun with it and just really enjoy being back competing because I could. And so I had the slogan, fear the chicken leg, because my leg atrophied so much that my left leg was a lot smaller than my right. And so we had towels made that said fear the chicken leg. My mom bought a bunch of rubber chickens that she just kind of like handed out to people, and they swung it around in my matches. So we had a lot of fun, and it was great, like coming back on tour. I necessarily wasn't playing like my best or moving my best, but I won my first match, which is all that mattered, and kind of just the emotion of like how far I've come, and I finally like got back to playing again was huge. And then since then, after that, it was every single tournament I played gradually got better and better, and I was getting stronger and stronger, and like getting back into match play and squash, and I was just I had no pressure, and so I was just free to play. I was just, you know what, nobody expects anything from me, I'm just going to enjoy myself. So in my next tournament, I beat number 8 in the world, and I got to the semifinals. It wasn't as big of a tournament, but I still got to the semifinals, and then the following tournament I beat number 5 in the world, which is huge, and I got to the quarterfinals of a major World Series event. So I was actually feeling like pretty good. And then ironically, on my 1-year anniversary of rupturing my Achilles, I won my 4th US national title. So that was huge, and you know, just like a lot of the emotions of like how much I've struggled with throughout those 10 months, and coming back, and the people that supported me versus like I had a sponsor that dropped me within the first week I was injured. So like I've seen kind of the good and bad side to being injured, and like it's not all, and like I wasn't making money because I wasn't playing tournaments, and so that kind of like pool of income dried up real fast. But fortunately, like US Squash stuck by me, my team stuck by me, they all believed in me, and so to see me kind of come back and do well and perform and beat these top players was really just like, it was just really emotional, and kind of just, it was almost like a thank you to them, pretty much. So
did that worry you, the financial side of things, being out so long, knowing that you're so close, as you will know in most tournament sports, the higher you finish, the more prize money you get. The fact now that you are dropping lower, coming in as a lower seed, and playing against the top players at the beginning, did that worry you? That, okay, that's a different kind of worry. There is one worry about, will I be able to compete? Then there is another worry about, do I have enough money to live a life that maybe you want to, or even just buying the food.
Yeah. And now I understand why a ton of professional athletes, when they retire, they go broke and they have to file for bankruptcy because, like, you're so used to getting money all the time, whether endorsements or, like, prize money and everything. And then once you stop, it's where are you getting money? So that kind of was a big eye-opener in the sense that, like, oh, my God, when I'm injured, like, I don't have another source of revenue. And I can't rely on sponsors to just continue to support me. So I was like, okay, I have to think of other ways to make money, which is kind of good in the sense that because I'm still so early in my career, that I now have this thought, this mindset of, okay, I need to set myself up for when I do retire. So it got me thinking of more of like the business aspect of squash and event management and all of that, and investing a little bit. And so it was not a good experience having to like count money a little bit and like worry about financials. But I think in the long run, it's gonna help out only because it's like kind of set me up for the future of like knowing that I need to start now to do something.
And are you grateful for that lesson? Do you feel like if you wouldn't have had the time out, that you would have maybe not realised that and only realised later down the line? Or are you...
Yeah, I would have taken it for granted 100%. But I think out of all, like, even though it sucked, I'm pretty grateful that for just rupturing my Achilles, in terms of that it taught me a lot. And I feel like it needed to happen for me to become a better squash player.
Okay. So, fast forwarding to now, Amanda, you are currently in Bristol training. This is pre-season training.
Yes.
Because the season is starting very soon. It's about mid-August now at the time of this interview, so the season will be starting in a few weeks. You have played tournaments since then for the rest until May in 2017?
Yes. 2018.
2018, sorry. So do you still have a mental hangover of when sometimes when you are reaching for a shot which you know in the back of your mind, I've done this before and it was just a simple lunge, but I was out for 10 months. Does that weigh heavy on your mind?
Unfortunately, it does. Not nearly as when I first got back on tour, but it's still, I mean, rupturing your Achilles is a massive trauma. And that stays in your head a little bit. And so it's not the fear of, am I going to rupture my Achilles again? Because my surgeons and everyone have all like reassured me like it's healed. And Achilles, if once you rupture it, it usually comes back stronger. But I'm a little bit more cautious now about injuring other parts of my body, and especially like my knees going. And so I don't want to like live in that fear of, okay, what if I do this? Am I going to get injured? Instead of just like being free to play and free to like make those moves or like really go all out and run as fast as I can on the court and all of that, instead of having that kind of a little bit of like a hesitation. So I think that's going to come over time, and it's getting better, but there's still something there.
And you're still so young. You're only 25 years old. It's crazy. 25 years old, and all of this we've just discussed.
I know.
And you're not even at your prime yet.
No.
I mean, it really is an amazing story already. Lord knows if we do this interview again in 5 years' time, what you would have achieved.
Yeah, maybe
in those 5
do a
years.
follow-up story.
But, already 25 and you've gone through this, you've achieved so much, you've hit rock bottom. Most people probably quit there, but you've picked yourself back up. You're going again. Do you set yourself targets, especially after what's happened, or before your Achilles injury? Were you setting yourself targets, and did that change afterwards, or do you just take every session, everything as it comes, or do you have like, by the age of 28 I want to be world number 1, 27 top 5, etc., etc.?
I don't think I put that certain like date and targets. I have goals every season that I want to achieve, But for me, it's more of just put 100% effort in and really give it my all, and I think the results will come because of it. And, you know, I just want to make sure that when I retire, I leave everything out on the table. That I retire and I say, I've done everything I can to be the best squash player that I can become. And I think if that happens, then I'll be at peace and not retire. But if it's more of like, oh, I need to achieve this ranking, this title, by this date, then it might, I mean, even I obviously do not do well with setting kind of time limits because I set 9 months and I had panic attacks, and so so I'm just trying to enjoy it, to be honest.
Okay, so that's the story, guys. That's the story.
And there you have it.
I mean, really amazing. And as I said, your mental strength is to be admired. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure people who are listening, squash players, or if you're not a squash player, either way, you can take a lot from someone like yourself. I have one random question.
Okay.
Just out of intrigue, who would you say is the hardest worker on the squash circuit?
Hardest worker on the squash circuit?
Men and women. Who's the hardest
wow.
worker? Who would you say, apart from yourself,
yes,
goes above and beyond and is just an insane athlete? Maybe not the most talented, but they work the hardest.
I mean, to be honest, that's a tough question because I don't know exactly what people are doing behind the scenes so much. And I'm sure everyone's working really hard. I know for the men, Paul Cole is someone who is not really the most, he's not the most talented player on tour. And honestly, like 5 years ago, people didn't even expect him to be very good professionally, but he's worked so hard, especially on the like fitness side and kind of foundation side of squash, so like basic length and drives and everything, and just being an overall solid player, that he's gotten himself to like top 8 in the world and top 10. And I think that's hugely, that's something to admire, because he's just, so many people are like, you're a terrible squash player, like they just write him off. And so he just stuck at it for years and just worked so hard to get himself up there. So I think that's something that's almost better than taking someone who's really talented and naturally very gifted, and just got to where their level is just because on their talent alone.
That is interesting. So where can the audience, where can we find you? What's your...
That's my favorite part.
So, because you have a website and your social media channels are very active, very good. Lots of good updates with your life. So where can we find you? So
on Instagram, you can find me at Sobhy93. It's SOBHY. And Twitter is It's Sobhy Time. Facebook is Amanda Sobhy Squash. And then my website, which will be released in hopefully the next week or so, it will be www.amandasobhy.com.
I've seen your website. You have a website already.
I do have a website, but it's the same website, okay, but I haven't really launched it yet.
Okay.
So you saw it, but it's just going through the like final touches.
I'll make sure to release this afterwards. So yeah, we'll sort that. But thank you very much again, Amanda.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And look forward to finding out where you get up to in the near future.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.